Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Just waiting on Gaston and Deborah. I know Sir Jonathan's not going to be here.
Eileen, we heard from Deborah. She sent an email that she's unable to make it this evening. Deborah Nevis, about an hour ago.
Just waiting on Gaston.
Okay.
Here's Gaston, and we are good to go.
Okay, great. Thank you. You're ready for me to begin, right, Eileen?
Let me just, yeah, Gaston is.
Oh, he didn't come in yet. Okay,
Yeah, it's not coming over.
great. And we don't have Eric tonight because we're not having any applications. Okay.
Don't know why Gaston's is giving me.
Oh, it popped in. Here he is.
Yeah, I don't know what happened because I brought it over. Like it shows him here, but it still shows him in the. All right, now it should be good.
Gaston, let us know if you're able to. Oh,
There.
and we see you. Okay, great. All right, I'll go ahead and begin then. In accordance with Section 5 of the Open Public Meetings Act, be advised that notice of this meeting was made by posting on the bulletin board in Town Hall and mailing to the officially designated newspapers a list of the meeting dates annually, indicating that this meeting would take place on Wednesday, July 6, 2022 at 7:30 p.m. via the Zoom virtual platform. Due to the COVID-19 virus, Millburn Town Hall is closed to the public for the purposes of planning board meetings. The meeting notice contained information necessary for members of the public to attend the meeting through the Zoom platform, both by audio and/or video means. This notice was posted on the Millburn Township website, Millburn Town Hall bulletin board, and Millburn Town Hall front door. Roll call.
Diane Aglow,
Here.
Gaston Halpert,
Here.
Maggie Miggins,
Here.
Craig Pleitner,
Here.
Srini Vijay,
Here.
Allison Canfield,
Here.
Vice Chair Daniel Baer,
Here.
Chair Beth Zoll.
Here. Thank you.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, I have a question about the agenda before we go on. I don't know if this is the right time to bring it up.
Sure.
If I would like to make an amendment to the agenda, would this be the appropriate time to do that?
I'm not sure. I will ask council. We have not made amendments to agendas. So Ed, can I ask you?
Yes. There's no specific time period within which one can make such a request. So I think that's up to the chair, so it can be done.
Okay, I guess if you want to make your request, then we can decide if we'll do it. Yeah.
Yes, I am looking at the agenda and I see there is no public comment. I'd like to amend the agenda tonight to allow for public comment. I see we have a lot of people from the township zooming on tonight. So that is my motion, that we amend the agenda to allow for public comment this evening.
We don't have an application in front of us. So the planning board, as we know, when we hear applications, that is the time when we have the public comment, as well as allow public to ask questions of all witnesses that come before us on an application. But we don't have any applications before us tonight. But I guess I would turn to Ed and ask if that is.
Let me just continue, if I may, for a moment. We may not have an official application, but we are actually reviewing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, a lot of very important overlay ordinances. This is the first time the public will have a chance to speak to them at the planning board level. So even though it's not customary that the public gets to talk, I think that we should make an exception. And I believe, I know at Township Committee, Mr. Buzak, correct me, once there's a motion on the table, we ask for a second and then we go for a vote.
So we're talking about two different things, which is, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the question. So there's a discussion of if we would have the ordinances which were introduced already at the TC, where public does have an opportunity to make public comment, has happened. And then there would be, then they come to the planning board where we are not voting on the ordinances, we're determining consistency or inconsistency with our master plan. And then we would return that decision to the TC, the Township Committee, for their action if they chose to take what advice we provide and then choose to act on it, which would be to adopt or not to adopt or to amend or to do whatever they choose to do with those ordinances.
Correct.
I guess, Ed, is that a clear characterization?
Yes, it is.
I still think it is paramount that we hear from all the 50 or so residents that are on Zoom, and I don't see how this could harm the process if we allow them to speak to us and hear from them, either before we discuss it, after we discuss it, but certainly before we vote.
Well, first, I just want to clarify so we're not misstating. We don't have 50 plus members of the public here. Just I don't know that they can see, so I just don't want to misstate what is really.
38. I apologize.
That's
38.
okay. That's okay. I just don't want
people Zoom on late, so we'll go with 38.
I understand. But
Okay.
that said, I don't think there's any precedent. And again, as members of the planning board, we are not voting to approve or disapprove this ordinance. We are voting to recommend our interpretation of its consistency or lack of consistency with our master plan. And thus there is not a precedent for having the public weigh in to give us their opinion on the ordinance's consistency with the master plan. That's us as the board's responsibility. Ed, I guess I would defer to you.
Well, I really can't state it any better than you just did, Madam Chair. This is a responsibility that the board has. It's not a public determination. The public can have their views on whatever they want, but at the end of the day, it's up to the planning board to make the technical determination as to whether or not these ordinances are consistent or inconsistent with the master plan, as you pointed out. The municipal land use law does not provide for public notice of this type of matter, dissimilar to, for example, the housing element and fair share plan or a master plan, where you have to provide notice and you are required to take public comment on an amendment to the master plan or the master plan. You're required to take public comment with regard to applications that are before the board. This determination, or this exercise that the board does, is one that the board undertakes, not members of the public.
Okay, so to all the people who have Zoomed on tonight, they will just be inactive participants this evening, and they do not get to speak and share any of their views this evening.
Well, I think, as the chair pointed out, there will be a public hearing on all of these ordinances, irrespective of whether the board makes a determination that they're consistent or inconsistent with the master plan, at the Township Committee on, I guess it's July 19th, I think. And they will have an opportunity to talk about the ordinances at that time and to put their thoughts on the record before the Township Committee votes on each of these ordinances.
Understood. So again, I just want to make it very clear to all those, now we're up to 40 attendees. You will not be able to speak tonight to have the planning board people who are voting on these ordinances to be consistent or inconsistent.
We are not, okay, thank you.
Okay.
Good.
I'm letting them know because I think a lot of people wanted to have the opportunity to be heard this evening. So I'm just letting them know that will not be happening. And even though precedent or not, I think, we can shake precedent up. Nothing wrong with that if any other members were willing to consider it.
Okay, with my role as chair, I would like us to stick with the agenda as we set forth tonight, but thank you for raising the item, and we are going to stick with it as determined and sent around and posted on the website.
Thank you for letting me be heard.
Sure thing.
Just for
Okay.
clarification, and Ed, I don't know, because she didn't make a motion, do we have to go through that whole?
Okay.
I don't know. I just want to, okay, perfect.
Our first item is a memorialization of application 22001, Cartley Associates. And that was distributed to Planning Board for review. Sorry, I'm echoing. If we could all mute when we're not on. I'm just hearing. Thank you. That was distributed and has a date on the top on my copy as 6/28/22. Ed, did you receive any edits or changes since the copy we have?
Yes, Ms. Davitt had 3 typographical corrections. They're not substantive, and I'll just tell you what they are. You really they're minor items, but they certainly need to be corrected. In 2 places where we cited section 607.2, parentheses, F as in Frank, we used a capital F. The proper citation is a lowercase f. So in those 2 places in the resolution, we made those changes. And the last one was in line 225. We utilized the word properly as opposed to proper. And that was just a typographical error. So those corrections will be made. You'll have a new, I just wanted to wait until they were made, maybe any other corrections tonight. But those are the 3 corrections that I've made so far. If there's any others, certainly they should be raised now before you vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Did anybody else have any additional corrections or comments on the memorialization? Diane, could I'm sorry, not Diane, Eileen, I'm sorry, I was looking at Diane's face and I said it. Eileen, could you read the names of those who voted in favor who would be allowed to approve this tonight or who are in attendance as well?
Eligible are Gaston, Maggie, Diane, Dan, and Beth.
Okay. Any further comments, corrections? Okay. I make a motion to approve the memorialization with the edits as provided by Mr. Buzak.
I'll second.
Gaston Halpert,
Yes.
Maggie Miggins,
Yes.
Diane Aglow,
Yes.
Daniel Bear,
Yes.
Beth Saul.
Yes. Okay, thank you. That was our memorialization. Next on the agenda, as alluded to, we have a number of items of business, including multiple ordinances, which we were given to review. And we also are joined tonight by Graham Petto, our board planner, who will be providing a bit of context. So on some of the ordinances, in addition to the memorandum that we received, I guess, Graham, I don't want to speak for you, but if you'd like to, if you could lead us in and describe what it is you're going to speak to, but I believe you're not speaking to all. So I guess if you could just explain what you are and are not going to cover, that would be great.
That's correct. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone, members of the board. My name is Graham Petto. I'm the board planner and also the serve as the township planner for the township of Millburn. Happy to be with you this evening to assist in reviewing the ordinances that are on the agenda. As noted by the chair, there is a significant number of ordinances. I've prepared consistency review memos for all of the ordinances listed, but I think that we should begin this evening by going through the affordable housing related ordinances. So for the benefit of the members here and also the public in attendance, I'm going to read off the ordinances. I have a presentation that's prepared. It's been 18 slides. That will be a comprehensive review of all the affordable housing related ordinances for review comprehensively and as one complete package. So listed on the agenda this evening, the review will encompass ordinance number 2604, 2605, 2606, 2607, and 2617. So if it's okay with you, Madam Chair, I'd like to review those collectively. The presentation that I have will go through and touch on each of those to review the modifications herein and give a presentation overview for those.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, very good. All right. I'm going to begin by getting set up and sharing over my screen so you can follow along on the presentation that I have. Just give me 1 second. Just give a thumbs up when we have visibility. We're good. Okay, great. All right. Thank you, everyone. So wanted to begin this evening just by providing a broad overview of all of the affordable housing related ordinances, which I just read off by number to you for review this evening. Again, as Mr. Buzak alluded to at the top of the conversation, the purpose of reviewing these ordinances this evening is to determine consistency or inconsistency with the Township Master Plan. The board will evaluate the ordinances before you this evening, make that recommendation, whether it's inconsistent or consistent, over to the Township Committee. And you can also provide any additional recommendations or comments in your correspondence up to the Township Committee regarding the ordinances as well. So, keep that in mind as you review the presentation this evening. And I'm going to ask perhaps I have them structured by zone, so perhaps I'll pause after each zone, and if there's any questions, we can take the opportunity to respond at that time, just so we don't get too lost on things. Okay. All right. So the agenda overview that I have for the presentation this evening. First, I'll touch on the context of the affordable housing ordinances. We'll go through a detailed review of the ordinances, and then we'll touch on the consistency with the master plan and identify areas which you may deem the ordinances to be consistent with the master plan. First, starting off on the context. So the zoning requirements of the executed final agreement between Fair Share Housing Center and the Township of Millburn, agreement term number 9 stipulates that the township agrees to place overlay zoning on the following properties at the prescribed residential density and requiring 20% set aside of affordable housing. And the ordinances before you this evening pertain to items B through F, the B2 zone along Morris Turnpike. C is the B2 zone along Millburn Avenue, the B4 zone, which is the entirety of the zone in downtown, the entirety of the CMO zone, and the OR1 zone. So some additional context. The township must not create barriers to residential development. Residential uses must be permitted in these locations up to the required density. Development can happen at a lesser density. The maximum is set forth in these proposed ordinances, but development certainly could happen at a lesser density. The zoning standards must provide for realistic opportunity to develop projects at the required densities. Residential development is not required on all rezoned sites. This includes many commercial zones, which will retain their permitted underlying uses. So commercial uses, retail, other uses of that type will remain permitted in these areas. And the settlement does not empower the township to use redevelopment or eminent domain to pursue residential development. This is strictly by right modifications to the zoning ordinance to incorporate residential provision. The settlement agreement provides for the required residential densities through overlay zoning, which provide an additional set of zoning standards on top of underlying zoning. However, after an evaluation, we structured the ordinances to directly integrate the requirements into the underlying zoning ordinance. And we have 3 reasons listed here for taking that approach. The first is implementation of overlay ordinances can create complex layering and can be very confusing to administer. It creates a set of dual standards that live under 2 separate sections of the code, which can be difficult for interpretation by municipal staff, by developers, and by property owners. So by creating the requirements within the same section, there's a common understanding of the requirements set forth. The second is by integrating residential development requirements into the existing standards, will promote clarity, context, and further strengthens reference to the bulk standards. So by having the residential requirements or the residential standards next to the front yard setback, the building height, and all those other things, we evaluate these zone districts and the requirements, they're all in one location in a comprehensive format for ease of use and review. And the third point is it avoids the need to draft entirely new ordinances. We're just inserting language into the existing ordinance structure and respecting the existing structure of the Millburn Township ordinance and zone districts. So this next slide kind of outlines the review that we'll walk through this evening. So we're going to conduct a review of all the ordinances that are set forth, the ordinances that I read at the top of the meeting. So we've organized them as follows. The first will be 2604-22, the OR1 zone, the office research zone. Next, then we'll proceed into the 2605-22, which is the CMO, commercial medical office zone. Third, we'll walk through 2606-22, the B2 zone, highway business zone. Fourth, we'll go through 2607, which is the B4 zone, the central business zone downtown. And then in addition, we have a fifth ordinance. The below ordinance is being amended for consistency with anticipated multifamily development and enhanced buffering requirements. That is 2617-22, which will amend the existing buffering requirements to include additional uses from which there must be buffering to adjacent residential uses. And I just want to pause here and just note that the development of these ordinances has gone through a fairly extensive process. We conducted 2 roundtable sessions, one in person in the Township Committee Room and one virtually on Zoom with residents to provide outreach and allow for the opportunity for public feedback and comment. And I do want to thank the residents that did participate in the process. It certainly helped us, and I think it's provided a much better product that will advance sentiments of the residential community, particularly those that are adjacent to these areas. Next, I just want to touch on some comprehensive, consistent modifications that we've made across all of these 4 proposed zone districts. So we've added the permitted use language as follows. The first is we've added as a permitted use in all these areas, multifamily housing developments. The second permitted principal use that we've added to these zones is a combination of multifamily housing developments and existing permitted uses to allow for mixed use development in these commercial areas. The second is that we've expanded permitted accessory uses. Currently in these zones, the only stipulated permitted accessory use is parking and loading facilities. We've expanded that list to include additional accessory uses that are customary and incidental to development permitted in each district, such as accessory, residential uses, a residential lobby, for a multifamily building or, community room, those types of things that would be an accessory use to a multifamily housing development. And third, we've incorporated language as required that will stipulate that 20% of the housing that's realized under these in these areas must be set aside for affordable housing, including the required income breakdowns. And that language is contained within each of these zoning ordinances. So we'll begin this evening first with the OR1 zone. This amends section 606.8 of the ordinance. And this was a pretty simple modification to add the permitted use of multifamily housing development and any combination thereof of other permitted uses at a maximum residential density of 20 units per acre. It's pretty straightforward here in the OR1 zone. There were no other substantive modifications to the zone district in this location. Okay. I'm going to proceed next to the CMO zone. I'm assuming there were not any questions on the OR1 zone modifications.
Wait, Graham,
yes.
if I may,
Yeah,
we're going to have chances to ask questions as we go over each individual one, right? So, okay.
Yes.
yeah.
And since the public can't ask, I'm going to have to anticipate questions that the public has, which I will have to do. Thank you.
So the next zone district that we have here is the CMO zone. This ordinance will amend section 606.9. And for those not quite familiar, the CMO zone district is located in the southern portion of the township, bounded by Main Street along the west side and the Broadway River. And it encompasses the majority of both sides of East Willow Street and Bleecker Street. It's largely an industrial, a commercial medical office use at this time. So pursuant to the terms of the agreement, we've incorporated the permitted use of a multifamily housing development at a maximum residential density of 18 dwelling units per acre. In addition, we have provided some amendments to the bulk standards of development in this area. We've reduced the minimum side rear yard setbacks from 2 times the building height to 1 times the building height. And we've increased the permitted building height from 30 feet to 40 feet only for structures containing a multifamily housing use on at least 1 full story. Thereby existing commercial uses or a solely commercial or medical office development still has a maximum height of just 30 feet. There's only a benefit to go up to 40 feet if you do include a multifamily housing development component. As I note here, all other uses must maintain that existing height, just 30 feet. I'll pause here and see if there's any questions regarding the CMO zone or modifications that we have presented. I'm not seeing any, Madam Chair, so I'm going to.
Thanks, Graham. And I just was wondering, I know, I don't believe you have it here and I don't recall it being in your memorandum, but does it state, or maybe there's on the red line, does it state what the zoning density has changed from and to? I see it's 218, but I don't know what it's from.
Yeah, so previously residential was not a permitted use within the CMO zone.
Thank
So
you.
this is
Okay.
a new use
yeah.
permitted at a set residential density. Thanks for that clarification. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Any further questions regarding the CMO zone amendments? Okay. All right, so we'll move forward to the B2 zone. The B2 zone, this encompasses 606.1, 606.2, and 606.3. We have 3 unique portions of the B2 zone, and I've highlighted those here on 2 small maps that are on the screen. The first is the upper portion of Morris Turnpike. This is to the west of Mount Ararat Road along Morris Turnpike. The second is Lower Morris Turnpike, and that is east of Mount Ararat Road and to the abutting B3 zone. And then the third portion of the B2 zone is these 2 areas on the north side of Millburn Avenue, straddling Wyoming Avenue. As I've noted,
Graham,
yes.
Please note where those 2 portions exactly are straddling. Because they're not near Morris Turnpike, so they're in a completely different part of town.
Right,
So
yeah,
maybe,
these are along
yeah.
Millburn Avenue to the west, to the east of Essex Street, and on each side of Wyoming Avenue, abutting the New Jersey Transit rail line to the north.
And across the street from the South Mountain section, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, we have existing R8 multifamily zone that fronts along Millburn Avenue directly across from these properties. The B2 zone, as presented here within the draft ordinances, has been replaced with 3 new zones to accommodate necessary amendments in a clear, transparent manner and to establish context-sensitive development parameters. And I'll explain why we took this approach, and I'm so happy to answer any questions, obviously.
Can I pause and just, sorry,
yeah.
Eileen, would you mind? I think Dan Bear is just got bounced out, but he's back in. If you could just bring him back in. Thanks. Sorry, Graham.
No, well, we can pause till Dan rejoins.
He can hear it. I think he's just wasn't in as a in our mode.
panel.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, sure. So we'll move forward and I'll review the 3 versions of the B2 zone that we're presenting. So here within the B2 zone, we put together this table. The first column here represents the bulk standards. So we have lot area, lot width, the setbacks, front, side, and rear, the coverages, building and lot coverage, the maximum height, floor area ratio, and the maximum density. The first column under B2 existing, these are the values that are currently within the township's ordinance related to this zone district. And then we have the B2A, B2B, and B2C. The B2A refers to the upper Morris Turnpike portion. The B2B refers to the lower Morris Turnpike portion. And the B2C refers to the Millburn Avenue portion of the B2 zone. I can jump back to review that. So the upper, this is the B2A, and then we have B2B, and then B2C here. So as you can see, we've amended a series of standards here within all of these districts. We've established a minimum lot area of 1 acre across all 3 of these districts. So in order to effectuate a development of this type or development in these zones, you need a minimum lot area size of 1 acre. We've maintained the required minimum lot width. And then moving into the setbacks, we conducted, as I mentioned previously, we conducted our roundtable sessions with adjoining property owners and neighbors in these areas. We also looked at existing building lines and building developments locations. So we reduced the front yard setback requirement from the required 50 feet down to 25 feet for the upper Morris Turnpike portion and 20 feet for the Lower Morris Turnpike portion and Millburn Avenue portions. The purpose of this reduction is to ensure that development is pulled closer to Morris Turnpike and Millburn Avenue to create greater separation and rear yard unoccupied area for off-street parking for these units, and to limit any front yard parking or large surface parking area in front of these buildings. We wanted to ensure that there was as little impact as possible. And I'll explain the buffer requirements that are further benefiting the rear separation as well at the end of the presentation. In addition, given the larger lot size for the Upper Morris Turnpike portion, the rear yard setback we've increased to 75 feet in that area. Those lots are much deeper. And we've maintained the rear yard requirement of 50 feet. We've maintained the building coverage maximum of 30%. And this is to ensure that there is sufficient space on the property to accommodate on-site parking. On-site parking needs to be required. In these developments, we want to ensure that there is sufficient parking to be accommodated on these properties. And by constraining the building coverage, there will be available space. The lot coverage we have increased slightly to 80% and 85%. And this is to ensure that there is sufficient area for parking to be accommodated on these properties as well. Again, we do maintain, if this did not go all the way up to 100%, obviously, because we do have that strong buffer requirement that I'll get to at the end of the presentation. Regarding maximum height, we've maintained the maximum height of 40 feet across all of these zones, with the one caveat for the B2C portion of the zone, and that is along Millburn Avenue. And I'll explain that in a second when we get down to the last line. With respect to floor area ratio, we've increased these to ensure that there is sufficient space to accommodate the residential development within these buildings. So we've increased these values slightly up to 0.8 and 1 floor area ratio. And the maximum and the density provision across these, as stipulated in the agreement, is 18 dwelling units per acre in the Upper Morris Turnpike portion, 18 units per acre in the Lower Morris Turnpike portion, and 40 units per acre in the Millburn Avenue portion of the B2 zone, the B2C. And I did want to revisit my the note that we have here to ensure that we can effectuate 40 dwelling units per acre at this site. We are adding this caveat provision that says development with at least one full story of multifamily. So a development that will yield a multifamily housing development is permitted to add an additional story up to 48 feet, 4 stories in height. All other uses, commercial or non-residential, must still maintain the 40-foot maximum height in the zone. Additional provisions that we've incorporated prohibit front yard parking. So as I mentioned, with the reduced front yard setback, we are prohibiting front yard parking in these locations to ensure a streetscape that will be sensitive and green and landscaped. And we are also requiring a 30-foot linear portion of the building, meaning that at the first floor, the first 30 feet from the front facade of the building rearward must contain a building wall and building elements. And then behind that portion, you can have building over parking. You can have a podium portion to allow for parking beneath the building. But the front portion fronting onto the primary street must contain a linear building element. So you can't see through to that podium parking. And finally, just an editorial note here, we have had to adjust, obviously, the numbering given the 601, 606, 1, 2, and 3 sequential numbering. The B3 district is moving to 606.6.4. Will be the new number of that section to accommodate the new zone districts. And finally, I wanted to present this. This is an example development that we modeled for the presentation at the roundtable session. This depicts a potential building envelope and building area on a 1-acre site along the Lower Morris Turnpike section. As you can see, this is a sample lot that we have that's 150 feet in width and 290 feet in depth, 1 acre in size. We have a driveway, an ingress driveway here, a 20-foot front yard setback, providing that green space for the building. We have a 3-story building with a podium portion over the rear 30 feet of the building, and then a parking area encompassing about 20,000 square feet and 76 parking spaces. And then here you'll note that we have a required 50-foot buffer portion adjacent to residential at the rear. We went through this exercise to try and model out to ensure that this development would fit, so that we could fit the required 18 units within a 1-acre site in this format to ensure that, this would comply with the stipulation for density yields in these zone areas. So I wanted to just share this as, this was the example that we presented at the roundtable, but I wanted the planning board to have the benefit to see that we had done some modeling on this. And as you'll note down here in the lower right-hand corner, we do share the coverages. So we show how we comply with all the coverage requirements. And as you'll note under this lot coverage requirement, while we moved up to 80%, it's very difficult to even hit that with the required buffering and the front yard setback as well, where there is no parking permitted. So, this is an example of the yield that we're looking at on a sample development site. I'll pause here and allow for any questions with respect to the B2 zone.
Graham, I'm curious, nobody in the township committee, well, 2 people on the subcommittee, how did these numbers come up? Who decided that that portion of Millburn Avenue should be 40 units per acre? And so that's one question. And it seems that you, at the roundtable, which many people did not know about, so I want to know from that roundtable what changes were actually effectuated and actually made changes in your presentation of these overlay zones. What came out of that?
Sure, happy to answer that. So I guess with respect to the first question, I personally was not privy to any conversations or discussions. We started with the township in September and received the executed settlement agreement that was signed in August. So I don't want to speak to, where densities came from because I'm not aware of that. So unfortunately, I can't answer your first question. Regarding the second question, I can certainly answer that. We, had a very productive first meeting with residents, particularly residents that live adjacent to the B2 zone at the first roundtable meeting. And they requested that we actually do the modeling of sample development sites to see how things would fit and how things would work. I can tell you in the first draft of the B2 zone ordinance, we had a 4-story building height as the minimum, as the required height for all of these portions of the zone in order to fit things. But once we went through the modeling exercise and talked through it with the residents, we realized that we could actually pull that back down and do 3 stories and 40 feet across all the areas, except, to accommodate the 40 units, obviously, in the one portion along Millburn Avenue. In addition to that, we talked through effective management and screening and buffering, and the residents provided a significant amount of feedback on the buffering modifications that I'll talk through at the end of the presentation. We've pulled the fence line off the rear property line and are now requiring screening on the opposite side. So any adjoining property owner will see landscaping and then a fence behind. They will not get a fresh new fence that plops in their rear yard. We've flipped around the requirements to ensure that they're protected and slightly and more buffered as well. So it was very productive conversations, and we appreciate the opportunity to get the feedback from residents.
Okay, so that was for B2A and 2B. Did you do any modeling for what is on Millburn Avenue that was going to be looking at the South Mountain area and backing up to the Wyoming area in the train? Was any modeling done or any South Mountain residents asked for their input? Because I know why the B2A and 2B, because there was a couple of residents who were aware of this. And, I'm not going to say shame on the residents because this is all came at us so quickly. So do you have an equivalent modeling for what 3 stories, 40 feet, or up to now 48 feet will be allowed on that portion of Millburn Avenue?
Yeah, we did go through and do that exercise, and that's why we actually had to, yield that 4th story in order to meet the 40 dwelling units per acre sizing. The other issue that we have, it's actually a benefit, is the lot depth is much greater on those properties than they are along Morris Turnpike. Those lots all are about or exceed 300 feet of distance from the front property line to the New Jersey Transit right away at the rear. So with the benefit of additional rear lot area, those buildings can be further set back, or they can be, have better parking and better buffering and screening from all properties. We've also incorporated, because those are 2 corner properties, we wanted to make sure that there were sufficient requirements for that landscaping and, the front yard setback on both sides in that area as well.
What is the front yard setback for that portion of Millburn Avenue? How close to the curb line will this
The front
be?
yard setback is 20 feet, and that 20 feet is what the existing setback is uniformly on the south side of Millburn Avenue and for the adjacent existing properties. And it's also the setback that is planned for the Annie Says building as well. We wanted to
Okay,
maintain
so-
the established building line.
So potentially, you're talking about 48 feet of buildings, 20 feet set back for the entire length of that portion of Millburn Avenue. And I never saw that modeling.
Happy to share the modeling, and we can certainly supplement that for the public presentation on July 19th when we do this again at the public hearing.
Okay, that would be important. Thank you.
Any other questions, Brian?
Gaston,
Speaker.
go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no, just more of a comment. I mean, the planning board, or certain people on the planning board have been advocating for less lot coverage, more swales, more rain gardens, more everything. And we're now increasing the lot coverage to 85% from 65. So I don't understand why we're going in that direction versus, and I've forgotten what goal it is in the master plan, but why are we going towards more lot coverage rather than trying to increase infiltration for, for our green purposes?
That's a great comment. I appreciate that. And that's something that we can evaluate. We were looking primarily at development yield and ensuring that these could be a realistic development opportunity to accommodate the building, parking, and other necessary elements to, realize the affordable housing that is set forth per the agreement. I do appreciate and share your concerns regarding the increased coverage and opportunities that the township has to increase stormwater management opportunities and through green design and green elements. And that's something I think we can certainly look at through additional site design requirements that may require low impact design or other opportunities to retain stormwater in a more managed way on the property. So I think that's certainly something that we could evaluate and do supplementals to this.
Okay, and why wasn't it included already? So like you said, we can do permeable pavers, we can do all these other things, and we've addressed this with multiple applications before. Like, it should be included in these ordinances now so that we don't have to do it later. I'm not certain why it's not addressed.
So I guess the answer to that is that the two requirements live in different locations in the code. So what we are amending here is the zoning ordinance, which stipulates and sets forth requirements for building height, size, massing, and coverage. Treatments such as pavers, landscaping, and all those types of things are what we call site design elements. And those live in a different section of the ordinance. And so we can certainly, work with the planning board to develop and, craft those requirements that would be in the site design section. So, in a parking lot, you can set forth site design standards that require low impact design, swales, or other retention measures to manage that stormwater. But that would live in a different requirement section, not this section specifically. So I think we can certainly work to effectuate those goals from the master plan in that way.
Thank you.
I would just like to jump on and say, Graham, when you started answering Gaston, the first thing you said, but this was all to the benefit of the developers. This is not to the benefit of the community, as
So
I see.
let's stick with just consistency questions to the master plan, but thank you. Okay, any other questions on this slide for Graham? Okay, and Gaston, I thank you. I think I want to hold on to that item on thinking about the site design element plan. So I'm noting it and I would like to bring it up later. Thanks.
Ms. Canfield, did you have a question?
Actually, I did. I'm so sorry. Just clarification. These are the maximums. Am I correct? Is that what my understanding is? So not necessarily what's been approved, or these are maximum that they could be. Thank you.
That's correct. Okay. Right, thank you. Okay, so next we'll go into the B4 zone, section 606.6. And here on the screen, we have a map depicting the B4 zone within the downtown area. I just wanted to note that we do have a significant number of publicly owned properties that are actually located and zoned as B4. But obviously, given their public ownership, they will not realize development. So I wanted to highlight those. So those are covered with this light blue hatching. So you'll see these are publicly owned or utility properties that would not be developable under this, to include the residential component. So the modifications herein pertain to the properties that are shown in red here on this image. And I did just want to note that, this is the one unique zone in that multifamily residential development is actually already permitted here in the B4 zone. Residential use is a permitted use. We are establishing a maximum density here within the B4 zone. And I did want to share these two sample apartment building properties, 295 Millburn Avenue and 291 Millburn Avenue. The building at 295 Millburn Avenue contains 19 dwelling units on 0.23 acres, I believe, which is a density yield of 76 dwelling units per acre. And the building at 291 Millburn Avenue contains 17 dwelling units on, I think, 0.24 acres, which yields 74 dwelling units per acre. So I just wanted to share this because, we talk about density and everybody, kind of gets wrapped up around density, but density is not necessarily how things look. These density can yield smaller projects on smaller lots. So I just wanted to share this, that we do have some existing development that far exceeds what we're discussing this evening here in the township.
Wait, what is the density of that building you just showed? What would that, anyone knows that building?
I have it here. It's 74 dwelling units per acre, building at 291 Millburn Avenue.
76 units per acre?
The one at 295 is 76 dwelling units per acre, and 291 is 74 dwelling units per acre.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's 19 units on 0.23 or 0.24 acres, and the same 0.2 or 3.24 acres, just under a quarter acre. The modifications that we have discussed here and presented before you in the draft ordinances for the B4 zone. The first is to permit ground floor residential uses such as lobbies, entries, storage rooms, or other things, but not within 30 feet of any street-facing facade. We want to make sure that street-facing facades are reserved for active ground floor uses and commercial spaces to maintain a vibrant downtown community. The second is to establish the maximum residential density of 40 units per acre. Again, as I mentioned, residential is a permitted use within the district, but we want to establish that maximum density. And then bulk standard amendments establish missing standards. So the existing B4 zone is silent on a few standards that are existing conditions. So the first is the front yard setback of 0 feet and the rear yard setback of 10 feet. We've also amended the side yard setback to require a 10-foot setback if one is provided, and that's to provide a driveway access to the rear portion of any building in the downtown area. And we've also decreased the maximum building coverage from 100% to 90% in this area as well. And we've also required screening of residential and amenity spaces in this area as well. Next, I wanted to note that we do have.
Graham,
Yeah.
I'm
Yes.
sorry. Is the B4 district, I thought it was 25 units an acre, not 40?
That's correct. You're correct. That is a typo. I apologize.
It's okay.
Thank you.
That's important because that's the downtown. Yeah.
Right. That's 25 an acre, right? Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Next in the B4 zone 606.6, we've incorporated an additional provision as recommended in the 2018 master plan, which creates an additional standard for a unique standard for properties that are adjacent to the Millburn train station. As set forth in the master plan, in the land use plan element, master plan recommendation for B4, which I have noted here at the bottom of my slide, page 54, matrix M3 says, consider raising the height limit above 3 stories in targeted locations to allow multifamily residential mixed use buildings within close proximity to the Millburn train station. So here in this area, these properties outlined in red, we've identified these and created language within the draft B4 ordinance to permit fourth story up to 48 feet within these locations. We've
Graham?
created some additional.
Hey, just a quick question. I just want to confirm, because just that the section is the correct section. I believe in the B4 zone, as amendment to section 606.7 B4 zone, it says on our agendas tonight. So if that's different, I just wanted to
606.
clarify.
Okay.
I just want to match this with my notes. So I don't know if either Eileen or you could confirm that.
Yes, it is 606.7. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. I just want to make sure, because the previous that you were discussing was 606.6.
Yes.
Okay, so this, when it's speaking to the B4 zone, that's 606.7.
Correct.
Okay, great, thanks.
So as I was saying, we've created a unique standard for properties within these areas outlined in red of maximum height of 4 stories, 48 feet. And we've created some additional parameters that will further constrain or limit the ability to effectuate this fourth story. The first is that the fourth story will require a step back from the front facade of 15 feet. I have this small graphic here on the right-hand side showing three stories of building line at the front and then a step back to that fourth story. So that step back requirement would require 15 foot for the fourth story to be pulled back 15 feet from the face of the building at a 0 foot lot line. And this will allow for the building, for someone standing across the street to look up and only see a 3-story building. That fourth story will not be visible. We've also set forth the requirement that the minimum lot area must be at least 3/4 of an acre in order to effectuate a fourth story in any of these areas. So you would need to consolidate some of these properties in order to even get to that point to provide a fourth story. Any questions on? I know there's a lot of unique nuances to this. Yes.
Grant, would it be possible to make it an acre rather than 3/4 of an acre?
Sure, that could certainly be a recommendation that this body, should there be consensus on that point, makes a recommendation up to the TC to modify that up to an acre.
Okay.
So Graham, that's downtown you're talking about now, the fourth story has a step back, right? Downtown?
Mhm.
How about the other part of Millburn Avenue that is in between South Mountain and Wyoming? Will that fourth story have to have a setback as well?
That is not in the draft, but that again could be a recommendation that is made by this group.
I think that's if this sticks to 40, that certainly should be, although the intent is should not be 40.
Great, thanks, Diane. That's a good
Can
suggestion.
I ask a
I'm
real
noting
quick
that too.
question, just and Graham? Because currently in the B4, we permit residential, but not on the ground floor. So if we had somebody with a small retail, hey, I want to put 2 apartments above my building, it's permitted. Now, I see that you're taking that out. So it's no longer going to be, that's coming out, and you're allowing multifamily housing. So my question is, how many units is multifamily housing? Do we have that? Is that defined anywhere?
That is defined as 3 or more.
So does that mean if now someone only wants to do 2 apartments, they can't? You've taken out the residential, but not on the ground floor. That's where I'm a little confused.
Okay, no, that's a good suggestion, because we probably do have some situations with smaller. So perhaps retaining the word residential and then just adding the multifamily housing development to this section.
Yeah, I just was just a little confusing because if you're taking it out, now you're telling me, well, you can't do residential. You have to do 3 or more because now it's not permitted use anywhere.
Right. No, that's an excellent.
Okay.
That's an excellent point. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Eileen, could you bring Dan back in to just confirm
I
that he
think-
remains a panelist? I think he keeps popping out. Thanks.
Okay.
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 Are there any other questions with respect to the B4?
No, I don't see any others.
All right, I don't see any other questions at this time. So I'm going to move forward to the buffer ordinance discussion. So as I mentioned at the top, this is the buffer ordinance amendments in 609.3. As I mentioned, this was in response to some of the feedback that we heard through the roundtable process to amend this buffer requirements. So the ordinance that you have before you amends the existing buffer requirement from non-residential uses only to add a buffer requirement from multifamily housing and mixed use developments as well. The required buffer is 20% of the lot depth or 50 feet, whichever is less. The buffer is required when non-residential multifamily housing or mixed use abuts any residential zone or a 1- and 2-family use located in any zone district, irrespective of the zone. So there may be, existing conditions where we have, a 1-family house in a B2 zone or something. The buffer would still apply from that property. And we've enhanced the landscape requirements in this section as well. We're requiring landscaping adjacent to residential properties and uses. As I mentioned, we're pulling the fence requirement, screening fence requirement in 5 feet from the rear property line and requiring that opposite side to be landscaped. So any adjoining residential homeowner will see landscaping and then a fence beyond rather than a new white vinyl fence in their backyard. We're also increasing the landscaping requirements here in this section for smaller buffer areas as well, with taller landscaping to shield the view of any of these buildings from adjacent residential properties. Happy to answer any questions if anyone has them on these.
Graham, I do.
Yes.
Just real quickly, certainly landscaping is temporary, and it's not a building or a wall. So are there any requirements, say for instance, in another owner, is there anything that we can do to make sure that this is something that's in the ordinance, whether it's passed on to a new owner? I'm not really sure how that would be done, but since it is a temporary, like, we can't really include landscaping.
Yeah, that's a great question. Essentially, the kind of contractual agreement or the agreement to maintain that landscaping comes through the site plan approval process and the resolution of approval that the land use board would render to approve the construction of this building or any of these developments, and inclusive of that landscape requirement. So, that's where, enforcement can happen by the township, should that landscaping die or fail. That was part of the approval, was to provide that landscaping and maintain that landscaping. So that is an opportunity to leverage some enforcement mechanism through the resolution of approval for the project.
And even passed on to a new owner of that particular property?
Yeah, resolutions and board approvals go with the land, not with the owner.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from other members on this? Okay, thanks. Just as a reminder, let's all stay on camera to the degree possible. Just want to make sure everybody's fully in attendance. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, next, kind of just setting the stage for the board's discussion and your discussion of the consistency review. So I just wanted to note that the proposed ordinances achieve the following. The first is it effectuates the settlement terms number 9 regarding the housing overlays, and number 18, the affordable housing set aside of the township settlement agreement. The second is that the proposed ordinances herein are consistent with objectives and recommendations from the 2018 master plan reexamination and update. Objective 1.05 of the 2018 master plan states that the township should create the realistic opportunity to provide for its fair share of the region's affordable housing. And the second recommendation, which I just referenced with respect to the B4 zone, is to consider raising the height limit above 3 stories in targeted locations to allow multifamily residential mixed-use buildings within close proximity to the Millburn train station. Again, that's on page 54 in Matrix M3. And finally, I just wanted to note that the 2018 Millburn Housing Element and Fair Share Plan, under Section 5, the Millburn Affordable Housing Plan, recommends multifamily residential as a permitted principal use in areas of the B2s, in all areas of the B2 zone and the CMO zone, at lower residential densities than set forth within the ordinances as introduced under this review. The B4 zone and the OR1 zone were not identified in the 2018 Housing Element and Fair Share Plan. Just wanted to note that for the board for your discussion. I think that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any final questions before you enter into discussions regarding consistency.
Thanks, Graham. Could you just clarify which ordinance the OR1 zone?
Sure. As far as the number,
that's the 606.8, I believe, the office research, right?
Yeah, hang on one second. Let me just pull it.
Yes, that's ordinance 2604.
Thank you.
section
22.
606.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Thank you. Just wanted to cross check that. Okay. Thank you. Oh, that's helpful.
There, knew I had it in here.
Yeah. Okay, great. So if I could just repeat what you just said at the end there, that OR1 and the B4 zone did not previously contemplate or include anything for residential.
Mhm.
Okay.
Well, the 2018 Fair Share Housing Plan did not contemplate any residential in those areas.
Okay. Thank you. And then the other ones did, but at different
Correct.
densities. Okay. Thank you. Other questions just before we go into session, if Graham could help answer. Diane, I see you have your hand raised.
So it goes with 1.05, but there's so many other goals and objectives in the master plan that are not met, are not consistent with this. And I will have questions as we go on over each one. I just find the disparity of the densities startling. I don't think I can be any stronger. It's just startling. No one knows how this small portion of Millburn Avenue is 40. That cannot be consistent with the master plan when you take into account traffic, you take into account schools, you take into account how the town functions. No one can tell me who invented that number of 40 units per acre as being a positive and consistent with the master plan and this township as a whole. The goals and objectives, and I brought them up when we had our closed session, it was shut down. They didn't seem to be important. They're very important. So it matches these two pieces. We're providing a realistic opportunity. The opportunity is actually only to the benefit of the developers. This is not to the benefit of this township. And now we have 54 attendees, so that has gone up. Some people might have gone off once they know they couldn't speak. So I don't understand why we are even going through this exercise, because you just said it has to go with the settlement agreement. Well, the settlement agreement at the last meeting was voted down 5-4. So why, and I don't understand, also Ed might want to explain this, why we are doing this in two piecemeals. These overlay zones, which are superseding all of our zoning in this entire town, were being dictated by this fair share housing settlement that was done in a closed session. No one knows what these numbers came up. And when you look at consistency in the town, you have more commercial areas. You have up in JFK where nobody lives, it's open land, have a third of some densities. Morris Avenue and Morris Turnpike is a highway by definition, has half the density of the portion on Millburn Avenue, which is in between two pure residential areas. So I don't see how we're even voting on any of this being consistent, how the master plan was the fair share, the overall settlement was turned down at the last planning board meeting. So I don't even know why we're going through this when it is clearly inconsistent with the goals and objectives of Millburn Township. And if we go through this, let it be known, this will forever and ever change the quality of this community. And we have people like Township Committee and Historic Board, and I'm going to go on for a minute, Beth, to say.
That's fine. I just want to, we will have the opportunity on each one, but
Yeah,
then
but I want to understand, this is a whole package, and there's now these separate little ordinances which will forever change the character that people have promised to maintain in this township. So if you will have apartment buildings looming over residential streets that cannot in any way, anyone on this board, I don't believe, can feel this is consistent and in the benefit of our community as a whole. And then I will ask each question as we get to each ordinance. But this is how I feel, and I speak. We've all gotten letters from residents. I think it's very clear that the disparity of these numbers are unacceptable and make no sense.
thank you, Diane.
Um,
Gaston, I see you have your hand raised.
Yep.
Madam
Sorry.
Chair, may I just raise something, because there is Ms. Eglo stated as a fact, something that's not a fact. She said that the planning board voted down the settlement agreement. As I pointed out several times, the settlement agreement is not before the planning board. The planning board did not vote down the settlement agreement. The planning board did not adopt the 2022 Housing Element and Fair Share Plan at its meeting. So let's keep the record straight. Secondly, the function of the board tonight is to make a determination as to whether these ordinances, each of these ordinances, is inconsistent with the master plan, which includes the 2018 reexamination report and update, and which includes 2018 Housing Element and Fair Share Plan. It does not include the the 2022 housing element and fair share plan because the board did not adopt that. So that is not in effect. So the measuring rod that the board has to use are the two documents that I just referred to. The board certainly can make a determination that the ordinances are inconsistent with aspects of that master plan that I just noted. That's the function of the board. It's not to question the motives of the genesis of these ordinances. The ordinances have been introduced. We have a specific function, and I would ask that the chair focus on that and focus the board on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Okay. Gaston, I think you did have a question.
Yeah. Again, it has to do with the density. So Graham showed us a picture of two buildings. I think they're downtown Main Street, Millburn Ave, 76, 74 units per acre. When we went to planning board school, one of the things that they said, when you're looking at something, a variance or something like that, look at whatever is going on around. And, if it's sort of consistent with what is happening around, then it's probably okay. And should you need to grant a variance and perhaps look at your ordinances. So in this case, when we have something that's 76 and 74, we're going to do a 40 down the street. It is a little inconsistent that the densities for the B4 district are much lower. And all I'm trying to do is put a connection there with the 76, 74, 40. Maybe we can spread a little bit out. And the other thing with it too is with the trying to preserve our character when we're allowing now a principal use of first floor residential dwellings. We fought very hard for the first floor commercial buildings of the Wells Fargo building. And we've tried to preserve that. We thought that was a very important to kind of maintain our downtown. So to me, that's also in conflict with preserving our downtown area. So two things: one, density; two is that first floor now being residential and not commercial. That to me is inconsistent. The other thing, the last one, and I don't know how it actually equates. So in the ordinance for our DPW site, I think that's in the B2C district, it still states that additionally, the affordable units shall be integrated with the market rate units. In buildings with multiple dwelling units, the affordable units shall be generally distributed within each building with market units, and the affordable units shall not be concentrated in separate buildings or in separate areas or floors from market rate units. And that is another one of my big concerns. I don't know how that's going to affect that building if it goes up, but to me, that this part of the ordinance would be in conflict with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaston. I think
Happy
those are
to-
helpful points, but Graham, go ahead. You wanted to respond.
Yeah, so sure. So I'll start with the last point regarding the DPW site. I have here the map showing downtown Millburn. This P stands for the public zone, this light blue color. This is the DPW building here within the public zone, and this is the portion of the lot that will be dedicated to the new 100% affordable building. So that is located in the public zone, not within the B2 zone, as Mr. Halpert had noted. So just wanted to clarify that. So second point was regarding the permission for ground floor residential uses. As you note, the requirement is that ground floor residential uses are not permitted within 30 feet of any street facing facade. So from the front building back, from the front wall of the building back 30 feet, you cannot have a ground floor use occupying that space. It is contemplated that, if you had a building on a side street, or, a building that kind of, had a rear portion where you could have some first floor residential uses at the back portion of a first floor, that could certainly be permitted. But the primary street facing facade, that first 30 feet of building width, length of the building cannot be occupied by a residential space. So other permitted uses within the zone would have to be located within that area. And then I'm sorry, I forget your first question. Oh, that was regarding modifications to the densities. That's a question for, Mr. Buzak. That's, those are set forth in the agreement. We're just, effectuating what's set forth there.
So Graham, thank you very much for the clarifications. Sorry about the B2, B4, you got it.
That's okay.
But the first floor residential, they're not allowed to build within 30 feet of the street? Is that what that?
A residential use cannot be located within 30 feet of the front facade, of any street facing facade.
Okay, so it basically maintains our commercial set.
Correct. Mhm.
Awesome. Okay,
Yeah.
great, thank you.
Yeah, but it permits residential, like say the back of the building, you could have a first floor residential use, but not in the front. The front portion has to maintain that active ground floor use.
Great. Thank you, Graham, for those clarifications.
have
I see,
questions.
let me go to Mr.
Sure.
Bear first and then you, Diane. Sure, if you can
Okay.
mute for the, thanks.
Yeah, I've
Go ahead,
been waiting, Diane, come on. Graham, I want to talk a little bit about the CMO zone, which historically has been kind of the dumping ground for uses in our township. And I think that the provision was for the potential to increase height from 30 to 40 feet if it was a full floor residential floor. Was there any consideration about not applying this zone to, or this change of zone to the northern portion of Willow Street, which abuts the southern portion of the South Mountain residential area? And for transparency's sake, I happen to live over there. Seems to me that those are very large lots, very large buildings already. And to allow for the increase of height of 40 feet would be potentially problematic. So was there any consideration of maybe not applying the change to the northern portion of Willow Street and to provide a little bit of relief to those residents that live in the just to the north side of the river?
Sure. So there was not that was not contemplated because the agreement sets forth that the density is to be applied uniformly across all portions of the CMO zone. And in order to yield the residential density, we needed to accommodate that in an additional story, in order to realize those density levels. That is certainly something I think that this board could make a recommendation to the township committee that perhaps setbacks or step backs be evaluated within the CMO zone to address or mitigate any of those impacts, just as Ms. Eglow alluded to in the B2 C zone along Millburn Avenue, incorporating
Well,
step back.
it would be a little bit different because typically you would apply the step back to the front facade of the building, provide some relief from the sidewalk, from the area where people walk. Here, you would be requiring a setback in the back of the building. So that's not typical.
It's not. But
I'm familiar with all the years of planning I've done. So I don't think that's applicable here. So I'll just leave my comment as it is that I find that fact that the northern portion, the area north of Willow, was not considered to be left out of the rezoning. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Diane, you had a question next. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Graham, I just want to say you're a professional planner. You wrote all these ordinances after the fact that they were decided in some subcommittee meeting. So you're very fluid in your answers. This is what you do for a living. It's not what I do for a living. We always say we rely on our professionals. But I want to ask you, I can't believe it's being done, that this is good planning, that you as a professional believe that changing the planning of the
Diane,
entire.
I just want to ask you to ask a question about
Okay,
the
do you
ordinance and not
believe-
attack
okay.
him personally,
Okay,
please.
I'm not attacking Graham. He's done a fabulous
Okay.
job what he has to do. Do you believe this is good planning and best planning practices to change the entire township zoning in one evening or at a meeting and not really dive into each particular necessity of that particular neighborhood, be it South Mountain, be it downtown and the CMO? And I just have to question, Graham, the disparity of these units per acre. I cannot believe that as a planner, this is good planning practice. Being
Madam
dictated.
Chair,
So
I'm gonna ask-
Diane, yeah,
I'm
you're
gonna ask-
sharing your opinion and that's fine. You're sharing your opinion saying, don't you agree? So I
Well,
appreciate the point
I-
you've made. I
I'm
think we've made the
discussing.
comment, Diane. You've made the comment. We know that you have, we have given you airtime to share your opinion regarding the densities. I think we fully understand that. I don't think it's appropriate to ask the planner if
Well,
he's doing the job that he was asked to
I
do.
know.
He gave an ordinance to the TC gave an ordinance to the planning board. So we're not questioning the origin.
So his opinion as a planner, if this is good planning practices, is not a relevant fact to change the entire town's zoning?
We are not judging whether this is good planning or not. We're judging whether this is
Oh.
consistent with our municipal master plan. That's our
Is not,
purview tonight.
do we not want good
Thank
planning
you.
to be consistent? Okay, and I can take the airtime. I'm on the board, and that's the only way I can get.
And I feel that we're giving it to you and we're ceding it to you.
Okay,
I
okay.
don't feel that I'm muting you or cutting you off. I'm asking you not to direct a comment as a question. Any additional questions from the board regarding Graham's presentation? Okay. If that's the conclusion of the questions, then I think we would thank you, Graham, and ask you to unshare so we can see one another.
Sure.
And then we would,
I
oh,
just
I'm
wanna
sorry.
Thank everyone for your feedback this evening. I appreciate all the feedback that everyone's given. And this will help us for our presentation that we'll make at the Township Committee meeting on July 19th. So look forward to sharing more then. So thank you all.
Thank you, Graham. And as a reminder, the Township Committee meeting on July 19th is also an opportunity for the public to come and comment and provide any additional testimony, comments, or I don't know if they're allowed to ask questions at that meeting. That's not my meeting. So now, Ed, would it be appropriate for us to go one by one to discuss each ordinance, perhaps?
Well, yeah, you can do it a variety of ways. You can do it each ordinance separately and determine consistency or inconsistency with the master plan, as I've noted. You could do them globally. And when you get through that aspect of it, I think the second step should be for the board to make any recommendations as a board to the township committee based upon some of the discussion or based upon the discussion that has taken place thus far and any further discussion. But those should be two separate things. I think we have to be careful to not combine the two. So I would ask that you first look at consistency issues. Graham's conclusion of his report noted a couple of things. And I think the discussion should focus on that initially.
Thank you. Okay, I would prefer to go one by one because I think each one is its own item. Dan, I see you have your hand raised.
Just a quick comment. Thank you, Beth. It's happened before, irrespective of how this board votes. This board can vote yes, approve or disapprove a certain ordinance. Still, the final decision.
Dan, I want to clarify, I'm sorry, but we do not approve or disapprove any ordinance.
I'm sorry. With respect to the consistency with the master plan path. Okay, I know, I understand. Believe me, I understand. You know that. Irrespective of how we vote tonight, with respect to the consistency of the master plan, the township committee, and this goes to you, Ed, can accept or find that, let's say the township, the planning board finds that it's inconsistent with the master plan. The township committee could still find that it's substantially consistent or overturn and not accept what the planning board's decision is on a particular ordinance.
Yes, the protocol is after the planning board makes its determination as to whether each of these ordinances is consistent or inconsistent with the master plan. When the township committee votes, if the planning board has found the ordinance inconsistent with the master plan, the township committee can nonetheless adopt the ordinance. But there's two things that are raised in their adoption. Number one, they have to adopt it by a majority of the entire township committee. Now, in a township committee form of government, where you have 5 committee members, a majority of the entire township committee is 3, so you need 3 affirmative votes. But also under the township form of government, you need 3 affirmative votes to adopt any ordinance. So irrespective of whether the ordinance is consistent or inconsistent, the township committee needs 3 affirmative votes to adopt it. However, if it is inconsistent, simultaneously with adopting the ordinance, the township committee has to adopt a concurrent or concomitant resolution in which they explain the reason they are adopting an ordinance that is inconsistent, that has been found inconsistent by the planning board, and that is inconsistent with the master plan. They need to set that forth in a resolution that has to be adopted. So that's the consequence of the planning board's finding an ordinance inconsistent. But you are correct, that does not prevent the township committee from adopting the ordinance. And likewise, with regard to the recommendations, just to finish the thought, same kind of thing. If the planning board makes recommendations and the township committee decides that they're not going to make any modifications based upon those recommendations, the ordinance again has to be adopted by that same vote. But they only have to put into the record, they don't have to adopt a separate resolution, they have to put into the record the reason they are not accepting the recommendations that the planning board has made. So that's the protocol.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that everyone, in particular, those who are in the audience, understood the full process. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you. Okay. So that said, just to keep us different, because we have a number of ordinances, 2 of which we have not yet discussed. And so I would like to push those to later discussion because I think we just had a helpful presentation. So let's begin with 2604-22. That was the OR1, the office research zone that Graham walked us through. So, and just confirming, Dan, that is not the CMO that you were just speaking to. This is the office research zone. So this is the one that provides a maximum residential density of 20 units per acre, whereas today there is no current residential. And the multifamily is proposed as limited to a specific block. And Graham, that block is larger than 1 acre. Thank you.
Yes, that's correct.
Can you explain again exactly where this is? Block 5302, lot 1?
Sure, Graham, would you have the presentation handy to pull back up the map?
Sure. I'll share it on the screen right now.
Sure, thank you.
This light pink portion of the OR1 zone.
Where physically in the township is that for people who are watching who don't know these zones?
Oh, sure. This is JFK Parkway. This is the Mall of Short Hills. This is the Hilton Short Hills is located on this property.
Okay, so that's only 20 units per acre. And do we know why that is so low? That could certainly stand a higher density.
So again, I don't think we're asking why it's certain densities. I think we're just,
I think we
mean,
need to know though.
I think you have asked and Graham has said he didn't know, but Graham, go ahead and answer.
Please.
As I noted, this is the text from term number 9 of the settlement agreement. As you'll note here under item E, under F, it says OR1, block 5302, lot 1, 20 dwelling units per acre. That is the set forth density for that property.
But we don't know who came up with that number 20.
I'm not aware of the nexus of that information. No.
It's a shame.
Thank you, Diane. That has been established now. I think we know that your question is where did these numbers come from? And I feel that that is now been answered.
No, but Ms. Zoll, it's like we're voting on these incredible densities and no one knows how they were established.
Understood. I think we have definitely established that debate tonight. I agree, but I would prefer if we not ask on each one because I think that we have that answer.
I have to point it out at each one comes through though, the density
Okay.
of 20.
Thank you. Okay. So additional questions, comments regarding the OR1 zone concerns or, understanding or interpretation of its consistency with our existing 2018 master plan. And Graham, can you confirm this was not one of the overlays that was originally conceived in the 2018?
That's correct. Mhm.
Okay, so as such, this is introducing something that was not included in what we have as our underlying 2018 master plan.
So what does that mean? That it's automatically inconsistent? What does that mean?
I think that's a fair interpretation, Diane, that what is proposed for 2604-22, while it does try to achieve consistency with the settlement agreement, it does not achieve consistency with our current master plan. It does not match what our master plan calls for, right? That's my interpretation, though.
That is correct. That is correct.
Okay.
So is it inconsistent with the 2018 master plan? However, it's consistent with the objective to create the realistic opportunity to provide for its fair share of the region's affordable housing. So it's inconsistent and consistent at the same time?
Yeah, I think the way we've handled that in the past, because we've gone through this with some of the other ordinances,
Sure.
affordable housing ordinances, we have made the determination that the ordinance is inconsistent with the master plan, but then we point out in the report that Eileen typically prepares that despite the fact that it is inconsistent with the master plan, it is consistent with certain goals or objectives or whatever it may be, as Graham pointed out. However, at the end of the day, as I said earlier in answer to Dan Baer's question, the ordinance would be inconsistent and the township committee has to meet the vote and adopt the resolution as I pointed out.
Thank you. Okay, so for that being said, I make a motion to I guess, vote or make the statement that ordinance 260422 is inconsistent with the master plan.
And you might just point out when you say that inconsistent with the master plan, insofar as this
Insofar
overlay
as
was
permitting
not-
residential
was
uses,
not
yeah.
recommended in that plan.
Thank you. Well, because you had mentioned we would talk about the report possibly
Yes, and
separately,
that's
the
fine.
consistencies. Okay, so I would say the vote would be it's not consistent, but I think we should take that step later and say where it is consistent in some ways. Though at the end of the day, if we have to pick, is it consistent? Is it not consistent? I think what I'm assessing is it's not consistent.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I would look for a second on that motion.
Second.
Gaston Halbert,
Yes.
Maggie Miggins,
Yes.
Craig Plattner,
Yes.
Diane Aglo,
I just want to make sure I'm voting that this is inconsistent.
not
Yes.
consistent, correct.
Correct.
And I vote yes, it is inconsistent.
Srini Vijay,
Yes.
Allison Canfield,
Yes.
Daniel Baer,
Yes.
Beth Zoll.
Yes. Okay, so we voted on that. Ed, would you suggest we now highlight the consistencies or move on and vote on all ordinances? I think we can go
Well,
either way, really.
I think the consistencies are generic consistencies, the objectives. So it may be better at the end. And again, this is up to you, Madam Chair, how you handle it. You want to do each one separately, we can do it. You can lump.
Why don't we just go one by one? I think while we're here and
Okay,
we have
that's
this one
fine.
in our mind. So Eileen, just for your record, and as you know, yes, it's just as Ms. Megan said, it creates the realistic opportunity for fair share housing development. And it's consistent. I think that's consistent with settlement agreement. Consistent with the settlement agreement, I think is how we'd want to state it. Are there any other items? I'm just trying to go back to confirm in my notes if there's any other items also on which this is consistent, but I think those are the main reasons
Wait.
for this zone.
I have a question. It's consistent with the settlement agreement that the planning board did not approve or did not.
Right, that the TC is working to do, but that we did not approve, correct?
Okay.
Yes, that the township is operating under, but not that the planning board did not take any action as to date. Well, we took an action, but we did not adopt that master plan element, correct? Okay, so Eileen, you have those notes. Okay, thank you. Let's move to ordinance 2605-22. This is regarding the CMO zone that we spoke about. Graham, I might ask you to just pull back up the map each time because I think it's helpful as we ponder each one. Thank you. So this is, we're down Main Street south of Millburn Avenue, and this is more popularly in red is where the ShopRite is, if that helps you orient yourself. Willow to Bleecker Street. So in this zone, and Graham, please jump in if I'm misstating. Similarly, there is no current allowance for residential. So there would be a new use for residential up to 18 units per acre.
That's correct.
Okay, understood. And Dan, is this the zone where you spoke on where north of Willow Street, it does allow for up to 40 feet and you've reduced the backyard, the rear yard setbacks from 2 times the building height to 1 time? Is that?
That's correct.
Okay. So you've allowed it to be, right, development to be closer to the river. And I think was that developed to accommodate the bulk?
Correct.
Okay.
To accommodate the density.
To accommodate the density. Thank you, Graham. I believe this similarly to the above, because it's introducing residential where there is not, it is not consistent with our current master plan.
Well, I think that if I have this correctly, and Graham, please just check this. The 2018 Housing Element and Fair Share Plan did recommend that residential inclusionary development be included in the CMO zone, but at a significantly lower density. It was at 10 units an acre, whereas in this one, we're talking about 18 units an acre.
So this one had an overlay in the 2018.
That's correct. Is that correct, Graham?
That is correct.
Okay.
Okay, good. Thank you. And still it's our previous master plan noted it at 10 units per acre, and this is proposing up to 18 units per acre.
Right.
So for that reason, for the increased allowance, I still do maintain that I think it's not consistent with our current master plan for that reason, but I think we can note that. Any other, thank you, Graham. It's okay to unshare now, but stay on standby, please. Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this?
I have a question, please. So will you just clarify, in 2018, it was saying 10 units and now we've changed, we've amended the zoning to 18? Is that?
Yeah, so
That's
I'll
correct.
just try to clarify and then Graham can confirm. In 2018, what that did was that added overlays. So there's the underlying zoning, and then I believe we changed it to, we adopted an overlay, which would permit up to, yes, 10 units per acre. And this is contemplating up to 18 units per acre.
Well, again,
That-
just to clarify, we didn't adopt anything. We adopted a housing element fair share plan that recommended that
Thank you.
this be subject to an overlay zone of 10 units an acre. That was never implemented by the township committee because it created, declared a judgment action and the settlement and so forth, and it moved from 10 to 18 dwelling units an acre. So this is now the implementation of that. But it's inconsistent with the 2018 housing element fair share plan recommendation.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Fortunately, it looks like Dan might have just popped off.
Yeah, I've been
He's
trying to
having-
bring him over, but for some
I
reason.
know, I think he's having connectivity issues. Okay. All right, hopefully he'll be able to rejoin momentarily before we can take action on this. Okay, great, that was fast, great. So that's it, I will move to, is it, I move that? I want to say this correctly, Ed. Can you teach me, please?
Yes, I think it is that you move that the planning board find that ordinance
2605-22 is
right,
inconsistent
inconsistent
with the master
with the
plan.
master plan insofar as the density of the residential portion of the CMO zone, because again, the 2018 housing element fair share plan did recommend that residential be introduced into the CMO zone, but at a lower density.
Thank you. I move that 2605-22 is inconsistent due to the increase of residential density.
Second it.
Thank you, Allison.
Welcome.
Gaston Halbert,
Yes.
Maggie Miggins,
Yes.
Craig Plattner,
Yes.
Diane Aglo,
Yes, inconsistent, yes.
Srini Vijay,
Yes.
Allison Canfield,
Yes.
Daniel Bear,
Yes.
Beth Zoll.
Yes. Okay, thank you. We're going to move. Oh, before we move, Eileen, I just want to make sure you sort of captured that while it is consistent in creating a realistic opportunity and is consistent in that it does permit residential, it's inconsistent in the increase from 10 to 18 as we find it. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to ordinance 2606-22. And this is a number of them. This was amending the definition section, the establishment of the B2A, B2B, and B2C, as we discussed, which had different densities as we saw on that table. Although, Graham, I may ask you to go ahead and pull that up. And the neighborhood B3 zone, just moving its number based on, as Graham described, just to allow everything to reside next to each other in our, as they stand in our zoning. Thank you. So it's the two zones here, three along B2A and B2B along Mars Turnpike, and the B2C down on the right, which is along Millburn Avenue at Wyoming Avenue. So I think similarly here, we have consistency with creating a realistic opportunity for fair share housing. We have consistency with, I think, our master plan goal and objective to develop in our downtowns and to create an opportunity for residential development in the downtowns. And I think this, Graham, please correct me, did this increase our lot coverage? Is this the one which went from 100% to? Or was that just via the buffer zone that went from 100% coverage to 90%, or is that in this zone?
That was the B4 zone.
In the B, okay, I'm sorry. I'll save that for next. Thank you. Sorry about that. Take that back. However, I believe it is inconsistent with the 2018 plan due to the increase of densities that is permitted and that is being recommended in these ordinances. And
That is correct, Madam Chair.
okay, thanks, Ed.
There's also one other thing that I noted and I should have said it earlier. The 2018 master plan in the B2 zone suggests a 15% set aside of affordable units rather than a 20%. These ordinances, as Graham pointed out, all require 20%. So that's, again, it's a technical issue, and the 20% produces more affordable housing in any inclusionary development. But it is inconsistent with what's in the 2018 master plan that said a 15% set aside. And I let me just look on the CMO zone was similar. So that was a 15% set aside in the 2018. So that's another inconsistency that should be included in the record. And I would just ask, let's do this one first and we'll jump back to just clarify that.
Thank you. I think that's clear, and that's probably going to be a universal comment that
Yes.
15% set aside was envisioned in the 2018 plan and 20% is being mandated now.
Correct.
Okay, but thank you. I appreciate that clarification. Okay. Additional questions or clarifications on this 2606 zone? Gaston, go ahead.
So if we do we do have the disparity between the densities on this one. How is that going to go with voting? Because we will make a motion. It's going to be, yes, it's not consistent with what was done 2018. And everybody's going to agree with it. But then there's some that may have a problem with still the 40 versus 20, 25, whatever it is. How do we go about including that into the motion?
I think that's a separate issue when we get to recommendations. So if there's the ordinance would be inconsistent based upon what you initially said. I think that's the way the motion should be made, voted on. And then if there's a recommendation that the density in one of the B2 zones should be reduced or modified, that can be put up for a vote for the board. And if the board votes to make that recommendation, that would be a recommendation that would be included in Eileen's report. I think it shouldn't, that's not inconsistent. The inconsistency is the density. And so long as it's not the same density that is set forth in the 2018 housing element and fair share plan, it's inconsistent. Whether it's inconsistent by 1 dwelling unit or 50 dwelling units, it doesn't matter. It's a generic determination.
But just to make sure I understood your response or your suggestion for Gaston's question, it's that we have the possibility of, if we as a board voted to, I guess, send a message or send, sort of send a statement, a recommendation from the planning board that we believe the 40 units per acre is too high, potentially. That would be something that the planning board could do.
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Can I also ask, I'm sorry.
No,
I'm just curious because the densities are now always higher than what was 2018. Are the setbacks also have been changed? So the setbacks are not consistent either, because haven't those all been changed? The heights have been changed. The setbacks have been changed.
The 2018 housing element and fair share plan did not, at least as I'm looking at it now, and I can't say I reread the entire housing element and fair share plan, but as it relates to these overlay zones, it did not get beyond densities. It did not get into the other bulk requirements in terms of setbacks or heights or anything like that. So I don't think we can make a determination that it's inconsistent in that regard, because there was nothing in the master plan that deals with that, the 2018 master plan.
And what were the densities? And when when B2 was just one zone, was there one recommended density for all of B2?
There were, let me just look here. Yes, the B2 zone, Morris Turnpike, was 10 dwelling units an acre. And the B2 zone for Millburn Avenue was 10 dwelling units per acre. So it was the same 10 dwelling units an acre.
Thank you. I appreciate that number of disparity proven.
Thanks. And I think, actually, Diane, to that point, I think the B2C we had talked about, although we're not voting inconsistent or consistent, but we could make the recommendation if you felt, or if we feel as a board that it makes sense to recommend exploring that step back at the 4th floor too, just like there's a step back in other zones as well.
Well, since you brought it up, I think we have to explore the entire situation, the density, the setbacks, the potential height to 40 to 48 feet. So I think there's a lot that needs to be explored. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so let's start with consistency or inconsistency. Oh, okay, the screen share just went away. Something changed in my. Okay, so I move that ordinance 260622 is inconsistent with the master plan due to the increase in density from 10 dwelling units per acre to 18 in, I'm sorry, to 25 in B.
No, you're right, 18.
To 18 in B2A and B2B, and to 40 in B2C.
Correct.
Thank you, sorry. I'll leave it there. I have a second.
Second.
Gaston Halbert,
Yes.
Maggie Miggins,
Yes.
Craig Plattner,
Yes.
Diane Aglo,
Yes, inconsistent. Thank you.
Srini Vijay,
Yes.
Allison Canfield,
Yes.
Daniel Bear,
You're muted, Dan. You're muted.
I'm in Zoom purgatory. Yes.
that's all.
Yes. And Dan, I'll say we've all been there.
And I want out. Thank you.
Sure. So that was the rationale for its inconsistency. I do think we would similarly, Eileen, also want to point out, as we just mentioned, inconsistency with the affordable housing set aside being increased from 15 to 20%. Just it's different from our 2018 plan. And it is consistent with the settlement agreement. It does create realistic opportunity for fair share housing development. It would raise the height in targeted locations in our downtown. And it did impact rear yard setbacks, not backing onto neighborhoods. So along Mars Turnpike, it would create that broader rear yard setbacks. I think those are consistencies. If we want to talk about the items we also just discussed regarding this ordinance, which include, as Gaston raised, questions about density and their distribution, as well as a step back. And Diane, was there another criteria that you had wanted to bring up?
Height. Did you say height?
Height, thank you. I don't know if somebody wants to propose something or we want to discuss or open that up, or, Gaston kind of shared his thoughts and concerns. I know Diane has shared her thoughts and concerns.
So I just want to be clear, the Morris Avenue B2A and B2B, that's 30 acres of land at 18 units an acre. So that's about 542 units. And then the B2C, which is the between Wyoming and Glen, that's 580 units if they were to be built on their 14 and a half acres. So it's the same amount of units in these overlay zones. One backs up to residential, the Morris ones, right? Those back right up to residential, that whole Glenwood section.
Mhm.
The ones on next to the Annie Says property back up to the railroad. Although they're across from South Mountain, they don't back up to residential, they back up to the railroad. So they have pretty much the same amount of units. They're just, one has 30 acres with the same amount of units as the one that has 15 acres. Is that correct? Am I correct in that?
I believe that's a correct interpretation. I guess, Graham,
Okay.
if you could confirm.
Yeah, that's correct. Mhm.
That's correct. Okay, so same amount of
With my
units,
numbers.
just set up differently. And one backs up to residential and one backs up to the railroad. Okay, thank you.
Okay, but I need to add to Ms. Megan's point. It's half the amount of acreage, half the amount of acreage. It might not back up, it might back up to the railroad, but it looms in front of a residential area that cannot handle that type of density. And we can go into the schools, that is affecting 2 schools. You can say the Morris Avenue could just affect 1 school, but you can't equate 30 acres to 15 acres. And just because it's the backyards, they have a large area through their round table. They were able to get it on the round table and have their parking area expanded in the back to give them more of a buffer. On Wyoming, between Parkview and Wyoming, this is 20 feet setback, Graham, from the street. So this is now potentially, and that, let's remember, Annie Says is 69 units per acre. So let it be very clear, when we make a recommendation, you are opening up the rest of this area to 69, not 40, potentially going to 69. So you're talking about tripling that number in still having.
I don't follow that. Can you just say that again?
The Annie Says property, which is going to come up on the 20th, is 69.
No. Annie Says it's already been adopted. We already reviewed the ordinances. Annie Says has been adopted.
Okay, okay, Ed, is it 69 units per acre?
I don't remember it.
It is. It is. Grams, 69?
150 units on, I believe it's under just over 2 acres.
It's 69 units per acre, we've been told.
That
Okay.
would be correct.
Well, okay, Graham, is that correct?
I'm pulling the confirmed number, so I give it.
Okay. So, Maggie, please do not equate 30 acres on Morris Turnpike, which is a highway zone, to 15 acres on a residential street in a much shorter.
All I said was that the Morris Avenue backs up to residential. It all backs up to that whole Glenwood section. It backs up to all of Glenwood. That's what I said. And that the district on between Wyoming, that district, the B2C, is backing up to a railroad. That's all I said. That's all I said. And that they're the same amount of units. One has 580, one has 542. That's all I said. And yes, Annie Says does have 150, just like the building next to the Arboretum is going to have 62 and 10,000 square feet of, doctor space. So it is being spread out. And also it's the opportunity. It doesn't mean it's getting built. And I think we have to be very clear about that. You're giving the opportunity. Doesn't mean it's getting built on. It's just an opportunity.
Be very clear, 500 units on 14 and a half acres or 500 units on 30 acres. Please don't conflate that as the same thing. Backyards.
No, it's not. One backs to residential and one backs to the railroad. You're absolutely right. One has 4 lanes of traffic in between it. One has 2. You're absolutely right. It is not the same. Thank you.
And one backs up and one fronts an entire residential area. So, we can go back and forth on this, but it's a huge disparity. backing up, fronting.
Okay, so what is the action that somebody wants to take, I guess, is where we would go next from here.
That it is completely inconsistent.
That's, we voted that it was not consistent already. That's, yeah. So
I don't think it's for us
Yeah,
to.
we're talking now, I'm sorry, we're talking now about recommendations.
yes,
To get us back on track here, well, recommendations that the planning board would like to make with regard to the B2, either each one separately or generically all three B2 zones, recommendations that the planning board would like the township committee to consider. And those recommendations have to be pretty specific so that the township committee knows what it is that you're asking or recommending, so they can then decide whether they're going to incorporate it or not incorporate it. So we have so far, as I noted it, and I think the chair noted it, setback, height, and density. And remember, we have 3 subzones, for lack of a better word, that have 2 of the 3 have the same density. The other one has 40. So to be pretty specific, do you want to change? You're focusing on the 40, and do you want, if you are focusing on the 40, do you have a recommendation as to what the density should be, or do you just want to make a general statement that 40 units per acre is too much, is too dense? Again, that's all up to the board, but you need to focus in on what you're actually recommending.
Okay, I would recommend that this goes back to the planner in another complete redo of this entire situation on all of these zones. They're obviously inconsistent. They need to be reconfigured and made consistent with more residential input. For us to sit here at last minute, say, oh, it should be this, it should be that, that is not, I don't believe, a good process moving forward. That's not protective of the town. That's not protective of the master plan, of its goals and objectives. I believe that we are now going to have to, I'm not a planner. I believe Graham should go back to the drawing board and bring it to the township committee, something that we can find palatable to all of our residents. That is my suggestion, not to try to figure out what numbers are going to work in the spur of the minute here. Would anybody?
I'm sorry, we have the ordinances before us. We have specific ordinances before us. Our charge, if those ordinances are inconsistent, we make that determination, or if they're consistent, we make that determination. And the next determination is any recommendations we have with regard to those ordinances. The recommendation that the ordinances all be scrapped and redone is not a valid recommendation to make back to the township committee who has introduced the ordinances and sent them over to the board.
Why not?
I guess if you want to put that motion and we want to vote on it, we can do, if somebody seconds your motion, we can
Okay, so
do that. Can you just articulate what the motion is?
well, I put a motion forward.
What are we making a motion on?
This is on a recommendation to the board so we've already voted on the ordinance, but now we're voting on making a recommendation regarding ordinance 2606.
And my motion is, I don't believe there's enough knowledge before us. There's enough time to make a consistent, coherent recommendation that is going to go back to the township committee, that this should be, I can just keep wording it, this should be scrapped, and this must be redone to find true consistency and parity that will work for the entire township. So that's, I don't know. Ed, you want to word that better? You know what I'm trying to say.
Well, I
know you don't like it, but that's what I'm trying to say. This is not good.
But I think the point is, when you go back and you're making a recommendation on these ordinances, your recommendation is to scrap the ordinance. When you get into what's fair and reasonable and what's proper and equitable and all of those kinds of things, that's not giving a recommendation to the township committee. Obviously, the township committee proposed these ordinances. Everybody didn't agree, understood, but under the majority rule, 3 of the 5 agreed that these were the ordinances. And to go back and say if you want to go back and say you scrap the ordinances, I don't agree that you have that within your power, but if the board wants to vote and do it, you know, I certainly can't stop the board from doing that. But when you then get into fair and reasonable, you're questioning the ethics and the morality and the integrity of the township committee, that they did not do that here. And I don't think that's the role of the planning board as a board to make those determinations and comment upon that to the township committee. That's well outside the jurisdiction of the board, who's to focus on the things that I talked about earlier. So that's the reason why I did not think that kind of recommendation was within the scope of the planning board's power under the municipal land use law.
So do you think we are qualified to come up with densities and setbacks and heights right here on the spot? I'm not qualified to do that. I need to sit with Graham as a planner. I need to sit.
Well,
with-
then have, if you
Come up with-
can't do that, then you can't make the recommendation to the township committee, because you are already making a determination by saying what you just said, that what's in here is not good, but you can't tell them, and you're not telling them what is good, what would be acceptable. So that kind of recommendation is with all due respect, a meaningless kind of recommendation, because you're just telling them you don't like what it is, but you're not telling them what it is you want. So the township committee can come back and say, okay, we think that it ought to be 38 units an acre. And it comes back to the planning board, and the planning board says, nope, density is too high. It shouldn't be 38 units to the acre.
Okay.
You got to do
Gotcha.
something. And
Okay, how
we'll
about we-
go back and forth.
how about I
That's
make a
not the
motion?
function here.
Okay, gotcha. I make a motion, everything goes back to the original densities from the 2018 numbers. The 2018 recommended overlays, which I believe were 10. And I understand they have to be 20% set aside as mandated by fair share housing.
That kind of recommendation can be made by the planning board. So that I think is an appropriate recommendation for the board to consider. I'm not commenting on the validity or invalidity or the propriety or impropriety, but legally.
Okay, so thank you. That's my motion. That's my motion. Go back to the recommendation overlays from 2018 of 10 units per acre.
Is there a second? Okay, so if we don't have a second, then it doesn't go to vote. Is that correct, Eileen?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, does anybody have anything further?
I have a question, please. Gaston brought up a very good point. One of it is about green spaces. Is there a percent that we can recommend, or that we take that into consideration? It wouldn't be on density, but it would be on lot coverage. Is that something that we could make a recommendation, or is that at a later date?
I think that is appropriate to, I guess I would defer to Ed or Graham, but I think that is appropriate for the planning board to make a recommendation on green space or lot coverage.
Yes, I think it is, and I'm going to pass it to Graham, because I think he started to get into this a little bit earlier, and it was not the appropriate time. But there are other land development regulations that we have that apply across the board to developments, and Graham, I'm going to that's the extent of my knowledge, so I'm going to pass it to you, and you can pick it up from there.
Sure. As I alluded to before earlier this evening in my response to Mr. Halpert's question regarding lot coverage, There are other sections of the ordinance, the site design standards, which are in the 500 sections of the DRZ, which outline detailed requirements for site plan applications, which can include curbing of a parking lot, green space, islands, landscaped areas, swales, other features that we can incorporate to expand upon that section to include green design, water retention, and stormwater management features. That would be a separate ordinance amendment. The ordinances that we're contemplating here this evening are all related to the zoning chapter of the DRZ. The section that I'm referring to is more the site design standards of the DRZ, performance standards, which is a different section. But regarding, kind of circling back to your comment, the board certainly has liberty to recommend, a percentage target for, lot coverage, just as, we had contemplated earlier. So board certainly has the ability to make that recommendation regarding lot coverage. And just for clarity here, I can reiterate the lot coverages that are contained within the ordinances that are before you, if you'd like that benefit to.
That would be great.
evaluate. So the B2A zone, the proposed lot coverage is 80% maximum. The B2B and the B2C are both 85% lot coverage maximums.
And those were increased from pre-existing
The
65?
the existing coverage maximum in the B2 zone is 65. Correct. Hope that helps.
Thank
for your
you.
Decision.
Gaston, I don't know if you want to potentially react to that or make
yeah,
any
so-
recommendations on a specific number, but I would allow you to do so.
No, but I did want to comment though, when Graham says site design features, so if we look at accessory uses, it says sustainable building and site design features, such as, but not limited to roof mounted solar, energy generating facilities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if those are there, why aren't we able to recommend the other ones that we want? Because those would really be site design features, that are sustainable building. Swales and rain gardens, permeable pavers, that's all in that type of thing. So I think it is appropriate to do that recommendation here.
So just to clarify, the accessory structure features that you're referring to, those are considered to be structures or additional physical installations on a site, such as solar panels or electric vehicle charging equipment or other things like that. The site design features that I'm referring to are more landscape treatments or elements like that, which are contained within the site design parameters. They're not a freestanding structure or an additional element that is non-native to the site. The site design features get to start to evaluate or contemplate, how things are managed, designed, laid out, and installed on the site, such as landscaping. All those other treatments are stipulated in that site design section. The board can certainly, recommend additional provisions for other green infrastructure, but that would be separate, in this design section. I hope that kind of clarifies your question.
Yes, yes, sort of. So it's infrastructure, but it's not, right? Sustainable building and site design features. So what they're talking about is actual building, and we're talking about just infrastructure.
Correct, right.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, because
sort
the
of get that.
coverage, we have building coverage, we have a building coverage maximum that's stipulated in these ordinances, but then this is lot coverage. And that other features that cover the lot are relative to the site design and how things are laid out or configured on the site, rather than the building or construction.
Okay, so then on that as well, the green checklist that we get with the applications, is there any way that we can get that implemented as actually mandatory to fill out and you need to follow this instead of it's just a checklist that we get to see? Because that would deal with infrastructure, demolition, building, Energy Star devices. Like, does that apply to this?
The board can certainly contemplate or make a recommendation to the CC if they evaluate requirements for checklists. Checklist items are set by ordinance, so that is a separate change. As far as application submission materials that come before the board, that could be something separate. But again, that's pertinent to the land use procedures and filing of application materials, not necessarily the zoning chapter that we're contemplating here and discussing this evening.
Okay. Yeah, so any way we can get that in, if it's a recommendation for another ordinance change or whatever it is, I think now is the time to do it. We're putting in these overlay zones. People are going to want to build. I know they will because they're doing it already. So whatever we can do to get that into our ordinances, I say we do it. Thank you.
Sure. I mean, I think that's what we heard. It would be reasonable. Yes, we're not going to develop and adopt those stipulations now, but I think if we wanted to recommend to the TC that they consider implementing an ordinance to increase, or I guess provide substance to the sustainability checklist by ordinance, then we request that they do so. That's the kind of recommendation you'd like to request?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would like to see make it mandatory. Yeah.
Sorry, Ed.
No, I think that you can do that, but I think that'll be done separate and apart from the ordinances that we're dealing with here. I understand
Okay.
that it's being generated as a result of the discussion. This is a healthy discussion, but I think, we need to separate what we're doing and get through the ordinances, and then we can always make a recommendation, whether it's tonight or at any time, for the township committee to consider amending ordinances or adding things or whatever. That's certainly within the purview of the planning board and is appropriate.
Okay.
And would that be targeting the fair housing piece? Because I think that's the piece that we're trying to, the ordinance in itself, but would that also target then the fair share housing request, that this is our recommendation?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think Gaston, I don't want to speak for Gaston, but sorry, I'm getting a weird feedback. He may be requesting it or thinking about it more broadly. So you're right, to Ed's point, maybe we do revisit it and think about implementing that sustainability checklist via ordinance more broadly in the town. I don't know, Gaston, I don't want to speak for you.
Well, yeah, the reason why it came up for me is because we did now do this fair share housing overlay, or we are doing it. And so now is the time to do it. So yes, it is targeting these, because I feel like this is where most of the development will be. And this is where we did it with Chatham Road. We did it with Wells Fargo. We wanted everything LEED certified. We wanted to get all this stuff in there, and we have nothing. So now that we're putting these things out there, we're putting in the ordinances, we're updating the master plan. Now is the time we need to do it, to get these new green elements into our system.
So Ed, given that, it does seem like it is in response to this ordinance and feedback on our, voting no, it's not consistent. We would like to see, consistent with the master plan, which calls for increased sustainability in development. So I think if we have a motion, I guess, if you want to make a motion, we can move forward on it.
Wait, I have to.
I'm not suggesting you don't do that. I'm suggesting that you handle these ordinances, because as Graham said, and as we're pointing out here, these kinds of comments are across the board comments. It's not only going to apply to these particular zones, assuming that these ordinances are adopted. It's not only going to apply to these, it's going to apply to development across the board in the township. So, and that's a valid concern, and I understand Gaston's reasoning that now's the time to do it, and now is the time to do it, but not at 9:45 when we're dealing with this ordinance. Let's get through these ordinances. We have several ordinances to get through, and we have a deadline to do that. And at the end of that, I would suggest that's when we can make the more broad recommendations that Gaston and others have referred to.
I get it, because it's broader than just 2607, 22 or 2606, 22. Okay, thank you.
I'd like to make a recommendation. First of all, I'm sorry that no one saw comfortable to second my motion, because one advantage of that is we could have then gone back to the 2018 overlays, which would give us a chance to go back to fair share housing and renegotiate everything. But in the meantime, then I would recommend that the South Mountain property have their height limited to what rest of the B2 has. The same density and the same height. There's no reason this should be 40 or 48 feet at 40 units. That is just unacceptable. The disparity is looming. And I would still recommend that we adopt the 2018 overlays and give us a chance to really go back, having our planner now in the room to know where these numbers, how they will come about and what we could do. In the meantime, the South Mountain between Wyoming and Parkview, or whatever that B2C is, should not be any different than the rest of the B2s. They should all go back to the 80% lot coverage and the 18 units per acre at the maximum. But I stick with my statement that they should all go back to be renegotiated.
Okay, that's the motion to maintain the heights.
That all of B2 should be equal and consistent.
I'll second that.
Gaston Halbert,
Yes.
Maggie Miggins,
No.
Craig Plattner,
No.
Diane Aglo,
Yes.
Srini Vijay,
No.
Allison Canfield,
No,
Daniel Bear,
I just want, before I vote, I just want to say, we have already voted that was inconsistent with the master plan. So now this goes back to the township committee, and the township committee has every opportunity to make these changes, and they take Diane's recommendation to heart and make these changes. Right. So I don't really understand why this is being put upon the planning board tonight. We have voted that it is inconsistent. I cannot vote to say that should be the same without going through a thorough analysis. So I hope the township committee takes it upon themselves, if they'd like to do a more thorough analysis and then advise the planning board with a new recommendation. So I'm going to vote no.
Beth Zoll,
Thank you, Dan. I think you captured that pretty well. While we did vote it inconsistent with the master plan, I think we were sending it back to the TC with our determination, and thus I also vote no. Okay. So that said, I would like us to move on to our next ordinance. We voted 3 so far inconsistent with the master plan. We are moving on to ordinance 260722. This is regarding the B4 zone, which we had a pretty good discussion about earlier with Graham. And there was one recommendation, I believe Craig had brought up, or a question Craig had regarding changing the minimum lot size to an acre. I'm sorry, it's not changing the minimum lot size. Can you restate that, Craig?
Yeah, let's go from 3/4 of an acre to an acre.
It's not changing the lot size, but changing the
The
If I could clarify,
Yeah.
Mr. Planer's request was to increase the minimum lot size to 1 acre for properties seeking a 4th story in
Thank you
one
for the
select
4th
portion of the B4 zone.
Thank you. Because I was going to say we can't change the lot size, but thank you. That was the hook. Okay. That said, that would get into the recommendations, but I just didn't want to lose that. Looking at my notes, and I think Gaston had also brought up some discussions on the lot coverage that was on the previous set. Okay.
This is not in the 2018 housing element and fair share plan, so that's an inconsistency that exists.
Great, thank you. So as such, I think I would move that 260722 is inconsistent with the master plan due to the nature of its adding residential to zones which don't otherwise currently permit it.
Correct.
I did just want to clarify on that in one respect and also support Ms. Dabbitt's recommendation that she had made earlier, residential is a permitted use currently within the B4 zone. The proposed amendment herein, supplements that by permitting multifamily housing developments, which is 3 or more dwelling units. And to further Ms. Dabbitt's recommendation that we retain the residential language, which would permit 1 or 2 units in combination with commercial uses on the first floor. So just wanted to note that that was the recommendation that she had made that I think should carry forward to the TC. And also just clarify that residential is permitted currently. So this is just clarifying the density and the multifamily housing style of the development.
Thank you, Graham. I appreciate that.
Mhm.
Okay. I think my motion still stands that this would be inconsistent with the master plan due to the proposed density. Is there a second on that?
Second.
Gaston Halbert,
Yes.
Maggie Miggins,
Yes.
Craig Plattner,
Yes.
Diane Aglo,
Yes to inconsistent, correct?
Yes.
yes. Jeannie
Yes.
Macy,
Yes.
Allison Canfield,
Yes.
Daniel Bear,
Yes.
Beth Saul.
Yes. Okay, thank you. I think we wanted to set forth some areas where it is consistent, which include raising height in the downtown, creating realistic opportunity for both multifamily and affordable housing, both of which are goals of the master plan. And also adding to the TC a recommendation that they explore increasing the minimum lot size to 1 acre for multifamily. Am I missing anything else that we wanted to capture? Okay, that's all I have in my notes. Thanks, Eileen, you have that.
And most of it. I'll get there.
Okay, you can always watch it back.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to move on not to the next sequential ordinance, but the last one that Graham presented to us, which was 2617-22 regarding the buffer zone. And he presented the sort of the increase, the idea of it's not currently in the requirement for multifamily housing and mixed use development. So this would amend the section to require that buffer zone between those and the residential uses. I personally think that's great. I think that helps preserve the character and, quiet and calmness. Adding a buffer would just defer noise and pollutants from any larger, more dense uses to lower density uses. Any other comments or?
Can you explain that again? I'm not following. Preserve the character, less dense, more quiet. Can you go over that
Sure.
again?
Having a buffer between a multifamily and another zone, a residential zone, creating a buffer of landscaping would, I think, help create a separation. That's what I was saying. Okay. Any other questions, comments from members of the planning board? Okay, I would move to assert that ordinance 2617-22 is not inconsistent with the master plan.
You mean consistent?
I mean,
you have to say
consistent, but
You're right, Madam Chair. And I know that sounds strange, but she properly stated
I know.
it is not inconsistent with the master plan.
and
That's
thus
different from finding
consistent.
it consistent with the master plan. And I'm not suggesting it's not consistent with the master plan, but that's not what we have to
It's not
find. We
inconsistent.
have to find whether or not it is not inconsistent. So the motion is correctly and properly worded.
I would need a second.
Second.
Gaston Halbert,
Yes.
Maggie Miggins,
Yes.
Craig Plattner,
Yes.
Diane Aglo,
Abstain.
Srini Vijay,
Yes.
Allison Canfield,
Yes.
Daniel Bear,
Yes.
that's all.
Yes. Okay. So I don't think that needs to be accompanied with any further notes in your transmission to the TC. And now we have two additional ordinances, and as they arrive, they were in a sort of a separate stapled packet, if that helps you organize yourselves. Our next ordinance that we would discuss is 2613-22, amendment to sections 301, which is definitions, as well as 6062, 6063, 6064, and 6091G, accessory structures. So we received a sort of a strike through version. And Graham, correct me if I'm wrong, but everything that is struck through was previously the ordinance that is proposed to be removed, and everything that is underlined is new added language.
That's correct.
Did anybody have questions, comments, or concerns regarding this? Gaston?
Yep, just one. So it went to our engineers and construction official. Did this go to the fire department as well?
Eileen, do you know?
I don't send it to anybody. I just get it from
The TC.
the township committee.
So we have a memorandum from Graham regarding this one, but we don't have, right, unlike an application, I think we don't have those.
Right. So, yeah, my concern would be that we're changing the setbacks, and I know I'm going through a setback variance for my house as well. And one of the concerns was definitely how close it is to any structures on the neighboring property, just to make sure fire doesn't jump. And so that we are reducing them quite a bit. Just want to make sure that the fire department was okay with it. So that's one comment. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions regarding these amendments to the definitions? Okay. And I think, Gaston, that could be a reasonable note to send back to the TC before they consider their final adoption. But I think we have our recommendations regarding, or our determination regarding consistency or inconsistency with the master plan. Any other concerns? Okay. I move that ordinance 2613-22 is not inconsistent with the master plan. In other words, consistent.
I second it.
Gaston Halbert,
Yes.
Maggie Miggins,
Yes.
Craig Plattner,
Yes.
Diane Aglo,
Abstain.
Srini Vijay,
Yes.
Allison Canfield,
Yes.
Daniel Bear,
Yes.
that's all.
Yes. Great, thank you. And I think, Eileen, if you would reflect when we transmit that one back,
Yep.
that we recommend the TC may want to circulate this
Input of the fire department regarding.
input fire and
Exactly.
police. I think
Okay.
it couldn't hurt. Great. Thank you. And our final ordinance for discussion tonight is ordinance 2615-22, which is amending section 607 to include electric vehicle supply service equipment. This was an exciting one to see, so I'm excited that our TC provided this to us. Any questions or comments or discussion items on this from planning board members?
Is this mandated by the state?
So this has been codified and adopted at the state level. So it is an existing requirement. The township is incorporating it locally so that, any local development activity that happens, typically, the development committee and, looks to your local ordinances. And now by having the state requirement codified locally, there's more clarity and understanding that that requirement needs to be met to provide electric vehicle supply equipment.
And is this the same wording as the state's?
There is a model ordinance that was provided by the state through their technical review and assistance process. The ordinance herein has incorporated a couple of additional requirements that the zoning subcommittee did discuss, such as signage, illumination, landscape screening, setback, location with respect to property line. So there were some minor tweaks that are permitted under the model ordinance.
Thank
Graham,
you. And
Graham,
sorry, go ahead.
just real quickly, disposal of the batteries and that type of thing. Would that be on this ordinance, or should it be considered in this ordinance?
So this ordinance pertains to the charging equipment. So this is the powered wired charging station that you plug your vehicle, that plugs into your vehicle. This isn't really related to battery supply or things of that type. So this is pertaining to the freestanding charging station that a vehicle would plug into.
And that charging station is powered by electricity?
Correct. Yeah, it's
Hardwired. Okay.
Mhm.
Just confirmation. Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
Great. And as noted by Graham, this is consistent with goal 6 of the 2018 master plan re-exam, which discussed developing and implementing strategies to address townwide sustainability, resiliency, and adapting to global climate change. So thanks, Graham, for calling that to our attention. Okay. Any further questions or comments? I move that ordinance 2615-22 is not inconsistent with the master plan.
Second. Craig got it.
Gaston Halbert,
Yes.
Maggie Miggins,
Yes.
Craig Plattner,
Yes.
Diane Aglo,
Yes.
Srini Vijay,
Yes.
Allison Canfield,
Yes.
Daniel Baer,
Yes.
Beth Zoll.
Yes. Okay, thank you. That covers the items on our agenda. And I think we reserve the right if we would like to discuss now, or if we would like to sort of take time to reflect and think, and maybe Gaston, I don't know if you would feel comfortable wanting to move forward, or if you wanted to kind of take time and think through how you might want to, or we might want to as a board, make a recommendation to our TC regarding implementing an ordinance or strengthening. I don't know, Graham, if it would be implementing a new ordinance or strengthening existing ordinances sort of uniformly to amend our zoning so that it would include more of the sustainability requirements.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could just be a broad recommendation and directing, the zoning subcommittee to evaluate, effectuating those things. I think it'd be best for the board here to identify what those items are. If it is, submission materials or application materials that come to you, if those aren't strong enough or clear enough, I think, providing language around that. If you'd like to see more green design in site features or site design, I think putting some language around that specific recommendation. I think that whatever recommendation you put forward to the TC should be directed and focused, to the appropriate area, be it application submission checklists or, design of sites, to effectuate those things. But give some clarity, as Mr. Buzek was alluding to earlier. You want to give the TC some clear direction as to how they should proceed with your recommendation.
Great. This is helping spur my memory, which is that I guess this would fall under new business if we wanted to discuss the creation of, I think you know where I'm going on this. We had talked about a planning board subcommittee, which would review the master plan for consistency. This is something that was discussed, I think, in our January meeting and again in March. And then we had volunteers who stepped up for the committee, and I've spoken with the vice chair and we've made selections of those names, but they have not been notified. So would the process be that I would announce them now at this meeting and they could then potentially be a subcommittee that would advance this objective?
Yes.
Okay. The members of the subcommittee would be Gaston, Maggie, myself, and Sujatha Shan, who is not with us tonight.
Mhm.
So we will be serving as the master plan review subcommittee. The intention is to go back, look at the recommendations we made in the 2018. Sorry, I'm getting weird feedback again. If I could just.
I just want to remember, I don't have the raise hand on the computer room. I just want to make sure before we end, I have one more comment.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dan. So that subcommittee will, we will coordinate amongst ourselves to meet and to review more broadly than just the resiliency and sustainability. The goal will be to sort of establish our own review process for the current master plan and make recommendations to the planning board to take action upon. So we, as the subcommittee, won't come up with any grand conclusions that go straight to the TC. We would come back to the planning board, make any recommendations, and then as a planning board would discuss and take action. Great. Diane, you wanted to speak. Go ahead.
Yeah, so since the planning board is going to be making recommendations to the TC, I'd like to know two things, Graham. You could help me out. Why Upper Millburn Avenue and the Chatham Road Short Hills train station area was not in any of these discussions. So we should make that recommendation that they should be included in moving forward, because I don't understand why they were not ever part of this conversation. I've asked that several times. I have not gotten a satisfactory answer to the same way. I don't know why the numbers were picked. Also, how about further east on Millburn Avenue? There was no overlays there as well. So first of all, importantly, if we're making recommendations, all of the town's zoning, since we're redoing the entire township zoning, and if we're going to go back and look at 2018, was Upper Millburn Avenue and Chatham Road, did they have overlays? Maybe Ed, you can tell me you've got the 2018 elements there.
I think at the point when we're going to discuss and bring back, I think that's like, I don't think we're not tonight. We're not going to be making
Well,
any.
Ed can just tell me if they were in there. Ed had access to know that everything was 10 units per acre recommended in 2018.
Sure.
So maybe Ed can tell me if that was in there.
Ed, you're muted.
Sorry. The four areas that were cited for overlay zoning was the C zone, which is the Canoe Country Club, the B2 zones, as I mentioned, the Morris Turnpike area, the Millburn Avenue area, and the CMO zone. Those were the only four that were alluded to for overlay zoning in the 2018 Housing Element and Fair Share Plan.
So Upper Millburn Avenue and the Chatham Road, I don't know, what zone is that upper? Is that Chatham Road? B?
Well,
It's an
the Silverman
RMF
property's
zone.
been rezoned.
No, Upper Millburn Avenue. What zone is that now considered?
I'm gonna have to pass that to Graham, who's got probably has the map up, the interactive map that he's very proud of. Rightfully so, by the way.
Yeah, I'm happy to share the map. I can put that up on the screen. Just give me 1 second.
It's
You seeing the map here?
I believe it's B3.
Upper Millburn Avenue?
Mm-hmm.
So we have, I'll just kind of go through the whole length. So there's OR2 and RO along this portion, the B2 portion, which we talked about this evening, with R8 on the other side, RO, B4 through the downtown, and then Millburn Avenue continues. Then we have B3 down this portion.
Okay, so So B3 was completely left out of any of these new conversations we're having. And also where the Short Hills train station, that's been left out. Why were they not included in any of these overlays? And if we're going to make recommendation to the Township Committee, they should be included. Should they not?
You're talking about where you want to add
We're
higher,
making recommendations to
densities?
the Township Committee. All of the town should be included moving forward. Maggie referenced that the Silverman project is going on. Okay. The Annie says problems going on if we're, if we're going to equate who's getting what. So we need to be consistent in changing the zoning for the entire township. So you can't just, hand pick out two particular zones in the township to not be affected by this complete change that is superseding everything that has been historically the way the zoning has worked in the Township Committee. So if we're going to make a recommendation, let's make a recommendation for fairness and inclusivity and parity. We don't have parity. We don't have all the zones included. So I think we need to adjust a lot of things moving forward. And I'm asking that goes into the record that we advise the Township Committee.
Okay, I think we hear you. We're not making a motion or anything tonight, but I thank you for, I guess, bringing that to our attention, and the subcommittee can take that from you tonight and we'll bring it back. And I think there'll be much more discussion before anything is advanced.
But wait, you had specific recommendations for the other areas that we discussed that were inconsistent. I'm just puzzled how this is all working.
We were only making recommendations on specific ordinances, the ones that came up. So because there wasn't an ordinance in that B3 zone, we're not making any recommendations on that zone.
And do we have any reasoning why it wasn't included? And why was Canoe taken out tonight? Another question.
I don't know those answers. I think
The settlement agreement, as Graham pointed out, was he indicated that was his charge. He was charged based upon the settlement agreement that the Township Committee entered into that specified these are the areas that are to be subject to overlay zoning. So when you ask the question as to why these things weren't there, I think with all due respect, you're directing the question to the wrong people. The Township Committee is the one who signed the settlement agreement and made those determinations. And I understand that you don't agree with those determinations, and you have every right to do that. But it's the Township Committee that made those determinations. That's who made the determinations. And that's who voted unanimously to sign the settlement agreement. So that is why we are here where we are. So when you ask those questions, Diane, you're asking them of yourself and of Maggie.
I'm putting things on the record, Mr. Buzak, that residents have questioned. We've lost some residents watching tonight, who are not watching any longer. But these are important questions. If we're going to go back to the Township Committee, of which I am on, the recommendations have to be more inclusive and have parity amongst all the zones. And to leave out a specific zone that has commercial and has residential in it has to go back to be reckoned and understood. Along with, and I will say for the last time, where all of these numbers magically appeared to set these new densities and these new setbacks and everything else.
Okay, thank you. I think we are through our agenda for the evening. And we have our next meeting is on the 13th or the 20th?
Special meeting has been noticed for the 20th.
Thank you. A special meeting has been noticed for the 20th. So that is when we will reconvene here at the planning board. It will be at 7:30 p.m. and the agenda will be available on Millburn Township website, and on the agenda is the Zoom link that you can click directly from there. Thank you. I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oppose. Okay, thank you. Good evening. Take
Good
care.
evening.
Night, everyone.
Oh, good night.
Have a good night.
Night.